The fall faster than you can say Caesar. We all know the Roman Empire was huge, like really huge. It was one of the largest empires in history, encompassing vast territories and diverse cultures. Imagine an empire so vast that it took weeks to travel from one end to the other, even with the fastest horses. It stretched from the misty shores of Britain, where the cold winds blew, to the scorching sands of the Middle East, where the sun blazed relentlessly. The Roman legions marched through forests, crossed rivers, and braved deserts to expand their dominion. But here's the kicker. This mighty empire, which had stood for centuries, crumbled faster than a stale croissant. Yes, you heard that right. Despite its grandeur and might, the Roman Empire fell apart with surprising speed. We're talking a couple of centuries tops. In the grand scheme of history, that's like a blink of an eye. One moment, Rome was the center of the world, and the next, it was a shadow of its former self. Now that's a historical nosedive. Imagine an empire that took centuries to build, collapsing in what feels like an instant. The fall of Rome is one of the most dramatic events in history, but what caused this epic collapse? Was it internal strife, political corruption, economic troubles, or perhaps a combination of all these factors? The Roman Senate was in constant turmoil, with emperors coming and going, often through violent means. Was it just a bunch of hairy barbarians with a taste for togas and destruction? The barbarian invasions certainly played a role, but they were just one piece of the puzzle. These invaders, with their fierce determination, chipped away at the empire's borders. Well, buckle up, my friends, because the story is way more complicated and way more interesting than that. Historians have debated the reasons for Rome's fall for centuries, and the truth is, it was a perfect storm of events. From economic troubles to military defeats, from political corruption to social decay, the fall of Rome is a tale of how even the mightiest can fall. Barbarians at the gates? Not so fast. Sure, the barbarians played their part. They were like that annoying neighbor who keeps borrowing your lawnmower and never returns it. Except instead of lawnmowers, they were after land, resources, and a good Roman feast. But blaming the fall of Rome solely on these external forces is like blaming the Titanic sinking on a rogue iceberg. It ignores the bigger picture. The truth is, Rome was already rotting from the inside. It was like a once majestic oak tree weakened by termites and disease, long before the storm came and knocked it down. On politics and greed, a toxic cocktail. Let's talk about Roman politics, shall we? The Roman political arena was a complex and often dangerous place, where power and influence were the ultimate prizes. Senators and politicians were constantly vying for control, using any means necessary to outmaneuver their rivals. Imagine a reality show with more backstabbing than an episode of Game of Thrones, and more corruption than a used car salesman on a roll. The stakes were incredibly high, and the consequences of failure could be deadly. Alliances were formed and broken in the blink of an eye, and trust was a rare commodity. That was Roman politics in a nutshell. The Senate was a battleground where words were weapons, and every decision was a potential turning point in the struggle for power. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and the outcomes of these debates could shape the future of the empire. Emperors rose and fell faster than the price of Bitcoin, often assassinated by their own guards or poisoned by their closest advisors. The position of emperor was as perilous as it was prestigious, with each ruler constantly looking over their shoulder, wary of the next betrayal. This constant power struggle meant that long-term planning and effective governance went out the window faster than a senator fleeing a gladiator match. The focus was always on the immediate, the urgent, and the personal, rather than the collective good of the empire. And when your leaders are more interested in lining their pockets than serving the people, well, let's just say the empire is not exactly on the fast track to success. Corruption was rampant, with bribes and kickbacks becoming the norm. The wealth of the empire was siphoned off by those in power, leaving the common people to suffer the consequences. The public, of course, was not blind to these machinations. Protests and public outcries were common, as citizens demanded accountability and justice. However, their voices were often drowned out by the clamor of political intrigue and the relentless pursuit of personal gain. Meanwhile, the military played a crucial role in this toxic cocktail. Generals and soldiers were not just defenders of the realm, but also key players in the political game. Their loyalty could make or break an emperor, and their support was often bought with promises of wealth and power. The generals, in turn, had their own ambitions. They were not content to merely serve. Many harbored dreams of power and influence, and some even aspired to the throne itself. This added yet another layer of complexity to an already volatile political landscape. Despite the chaos and corruption, the Roman Empire achieved remarkable feats. Its architecture, culture, and innovations left a lasting legacy that continues to influence the world today. But beneath the surface of this grandeur lay a seething cauldron of political ambition and greed. Ultimately, this toxic cocktail of politics and greed contributed to the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. The very forces that once drove its expansion and success became the seeds of its downfall, as internal strife and corruption eroded the foundations of its power. The story of Rome serves as a cautionary tale for us today. It reminds us of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of integrity in leadership. As we navigate our own political landscapes, we would do well to remember the lessons of the past and strive for a future where the common good prevails over personal gain. Bread and circuses weren't enough. Remember those famous bread and circuses that kept the Roman populace entertained? Think gladiator fights, chariot races, and enough free bread to make a baker weep. While these distractions worked for a while, they were essentially putting a band-aid on a gaping wound. The gap between the rich and the poor was wider than a Roman aqueduct, and social mobility was about as likely as spotting a unicorn riding a chariot. This simmering discontent created a volatile atmosphere ripe for exploitation by ambitious politicians, and yes, even those pesky barbarians. Section 5. The Empire that outgrew itself. Rome's military might was legendary. Their legions were like the ancient world's version of a well-oiled sword-wielding machine, but even the mightiest armies have their limits. As the empire expanded, so did its borders, and defending such a vast territory became increasingly difficult and expensive. It's like trying to maintain a swimming pool the size of Texas. Eventually, you're going to run out of chlorine, and things are going to get pretty gross. In Rome's case, they started running out of resources, soldiers, and the will to keep fighting on multiple fronts. Section 6. Adaptability, Rome's Achilles heel. Here's the thing about empires, and life in general change is inevitable. The Romans, however, were about as adaptable as a dinosaur trying to use a smartphone. They were stuck in their ways, clinging to old traditions and systems, even as the world around them shifted. They were slow to adopt new technologies, resistant to social reforms, and stubbornly clung to outdated military tactics. This lack of adaptability meant they were ill-equipped to deal with the complex challenges of a changing world. Section 7, a perfect storm of incompetence. So, there you have it. The fall of Rome wasn't caused by a single catastrophic event. It was a slow-burning train wreck, fueled by a toxic cocktail of political corruption, social unrest, military overreach, and a stubborn refusal to adapt. It's like watching a movie where the main character makes all the wrong decisions, ignores all the warning signs, and still somehow manages to be surprised when everything goes wrong in the end. Section 8. Lessons from the Rubble, a Modern Perspective. Now you might be thinking, Neil, this is all very interesting, but what does the fall of Rome have to do with me? It's a fair question. After all, ancient history can sometimes feel distant and irrelevant to our fast-paced, technology-driven lives. But if we look closer, we can see that the echoes of the past resonate in our present. Well, my friend, history might not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. The patterns and cycles of human behavior, societal structures, and political dynamics tend to reappear, albeit in different forms. The rise and fall of civilizations, the struggles for power, and the quest for justice are themes that transcend time. The same problems that plagued ancient Rome, corruption, inequality, and a resistance to change, are still relevant today. We see it in our political systems, in the widening gap between the rich and the poor, and in the reluctance to adapt to new challenges. The lessons from Rome's decline are not just historical footnotes. They are warnings and guides for our current and future societies. By studying the past, we can learn from the mistakes of those who came before us and hopefully avoid making the same blunders ourselves. History is a vast repository of human experience, filled with triumphs and tragedies, innovations and failures. It offers us a mirror to reflect on our actions and decisions. After all, who wants to end up on the wrong side of history? By understanding the causes and consequences of Rome's fall, we can strive to build a more just, equitable, and resilient society. So the next time you hear about the fall of Rome, remember that it's not just a story of the past, it's a lesson for the present and a guide for the future. In Section 9, History Repeats Itself. The Roman Empire, once a beacon of civilization, crumbled under the weight of its internal problems. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked corruption, social inequality, and a failure to adapt. It reminds us that even the mightiest empires can fall and that the seeds of destruction are often sown from within. So the next time you see a politician embroiled in scandal or witness the growing gap between the rich and the poor, remember the lessons of Rome. Because the choices we make today will shape the world of tomorrow. Section 10. So, what do you think? Could Rome have been saved? Was the fall of Rome inevitable? Or could this once mighty empire have been saved? Could they have reformed their political system, addressed social inequality, or adapted to a changing world? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below.